So here we are in lesson 6 of module 7, and we're going to have a look at storage vMotion. The idea here is that we'd like to be able to take some maintenance on a data store, or we'd like to evacuate a data store because we're upgrading it, or we're starting to run out of capacity on a particular data store, and we'd like to move a virtual machine to a new data store that has more capacity. Or you know what, I've got a data store that's built on spinning disks and it's just not cutting it for my virtual machine, and so I'd like to move it to a data store that's built from solid state devices. Well, if you want to do this when a virtual machine is powered on without any interruption to that virtual machine, then storage vMotion is the technology for you. In this lesson, we're going to have a look at how storage vMotion works, and we'll look at the guidelines of storage vMotion, and then we're going to migrate virtual machines using storage vMotion. One of the last options that we're going to have a look at is the combination of storage vMotion and host vMotion. We're going to move both the virtual machine's files from one data store to another and the virtual machine from one host to another all at the same time. And we'll look at some of the requirements for that as well. So, storage vMotion, of course, powered on virtual machines, allowing us to migrate a virtual machine from one data store to another data store to do lots of different things. In addition to simply choosing a more appropriate data store for a virtual machine, or mitigating some sort of capacity issue, we also have a couple of different nice features in storage vMotion. We can, in the process of executing a storage vMotion, change the virtual disk provisioning type from thin to thick provisioning, from thick provisioning to thin provisioning. It will also change the virtual machine's file names and its folder name if you had renamed the virtual machine in the inventory during the process of a storage vMotion. Okay? So it does a very, very nice job of allowing us to do whatever we need to in terms of managing our storage and managing our virtual machines. Now, storage vMotion in action. Let's look at how this works. Now, when we were using vMotion to migrate a VM from host to host, obviously we were looking at the virtual machine's memory footprint and loading that memory footprint onto a destination ESXi host. Now, this is not what we're doing for storage vMotion. For storage vMotion, obviously we're moving the virtual machine's files from one data store to another data store. But being as the virtual machine is powered on during this process, we can run into the same issues. How long does it take to move or copy a virtual machine's files from one data store to another data store? Well, it depends on the size of the virtual machine, the size of its virtual disks, and the speed of the storage network that we are moving across. Of course, while all of this happening, the virtual machine is powered on and executing new writes. So how do we capture those new writes during the process so that by the time the virtual machine files are all copied over to the new data store, I can simply switch over to that new data store? Well, let's have a look at how this works. We begin, first of all, by choosing, let me see if I can do this right here. We begin by choosing both the source and the destination data store. Okay? Now, the ESXi host that the virtual machine is running on must have access to both of these data stores. Now, there are two systems that are going to allow us to migrate the virtual machine or copy the virtual machine files from the source to the destination data store. And they have to do, the choice of those two systems has to do with whether or not you are moving those virtual machine files within a storage array or across storage arrays. If you are moving virtual machine files within a data store, it depends on whether or not that particular storage array supports an API from VMware called the vSphere API for Array Integration that allows ESXi to send a command to the storage array that says, copy these blocks from one location to another location within that same array. Okay. If the source and the destination data stores are within the same array, using the vSphere API, which is done automatically for us, is a really handy thing to do because the traffic of moving those blocks or moving those files does not have to traverse the storage network. It's all simply internal within a storage array. If, on the other hand, we do not have the capability of using VAAI, or we're moving from one storage array to another physical storage array, then we're going to have to use the storage network. And in doing so, we're going to use something called the data mover. As we, first of all, begin to start on your ESXi host a new virtual machine process. Let's have a look at this. Here's what happens. We start a new virtual machine process on the ESXi host. And what that new virtual machine process will do is begin using the destination data store as for both its read and writes. Now, while the VM is running, the original virtual machine process points to the source data store. By the time all of the files have been copied, or all of the blocks have been copied to the destination data store, we're then able to switch over to the new virtual machine process using the destination data store. In order to copy these blocks, we're either using internally in a storage array VAAI, or externally, we're using the data mover over the storage network. Okay? We begin this initial copy, and at that point, if there are new writes, a process running in ESXi called the mirror driver will copy new writes to both the source and the destination data stores at the same time. That way, by the time the initial copy has been complete, we can then switch over to the destination data store, and away we go. How do I know if I have VAAI? Well, first let me say that most modern storage arrays actually do support this API. It's done with an extended SCSI command set. And if you find even in a big box electronics store, a small business or home office NAS drive or NAS box, if it's got a VMware Ready logo on it, that tells you that it supports VAAI. You can also look at the individual LUNs by going to your ESXi host, selecting Configure, and then Storage Devices. If you see in this column that says Hardware Acceleration and you see Supported, that tells you that VAAI is a feature set that is available on that particular LUN. Now we'll know whether or not we need to plan for saturating the storage network as we're utilizing or executing a storage vMotion, or we can do everything within a single storage array. So guidelines for this. First of all, understand when you are executing a storage vMotion, whether or not you're going to be using the storage network or you're going to be using internal mechanisms within your array. Okay? Plan accordingly. Right? If you are using the storage network, it'll likely saturate that storage network. Try to choose some sort of off-peak hours in order to do that. Okay? There is a limitation that says independent virtual machine disks must be in persistent mode. By default, that is the case. But if you switch your virtual machines to an independent, non-persistent mode, meaning new writes will not be saved to a virtual disk, and won't be persistent through reboots, then storage vMotion is not compatible there. Now, of course, you can combine a storage vMotion with a vSphere vMotion by moving both the virtual machine's files from data store to data store and the virtual machine process and memory from host to host at the same time. And when you do this, this will eliminate the requirement for shared storage, which is a very nice thing. You can actually move a virtual machine's files using the vMotion network in this case when you don't have shared storage. You simply need to choose a data store that the destination ESXi host has access to, and will begin to move those virtual machine files right along with the virtual machine itself. A couple of other things to call out here. If you're doing host level maintenance, okay, you should use vMotion to move the virtual machines off of a particular host, okay? And if you're doing data store maintenance, use storage vMotion to move the virtual machines to another data store. If you're reconfiguring a particular data store, move the virtual machines to another data store using storage vMotion. If you find that a particular data store has all of its IOPS capabilities consumed or all of its capacity consumed, using storage vMotion to move virtual machines to another data store that has spare and excess capacity in terms of IOPS as well as actual storage capacity for data is a really great use case for storage vMotion. All right, so let's do storage vMotion in the lab here, where we're going to migrate both our virtual machine files from a local storage to shared storage, as well as execute a combination of vMotion and storage vMotion to choose a new data store, as well as a new ESXi host for your virtual machines. So that's our lesson on storage vMotion. I hope you've enjoyed that and you recognize the use cases and the utility of storage vMotion. When we come back, we're going to have a look at vSphere snapshots. So stay tuned for that. Talk to you soon.